Our first show that we're launching is a show called A Quarter Life Faith. It's a docu-series podcast. We interview and document the lives and the journeys of some of the bigger Christian personalities. So Pentatonics, Kevin Alushla, documenting his journey from going to Stanford and then leaving to pursue a life in music, and how did he find his purpose and how he escaped the quarter life crisis that many of us go into. And
welcome back to Advent Next, a theological podcast curated for curious faith discussions. This week, I'm talking with my friend Andrew Ashley, who is a producer, director, and now CEO of a new app called Parabel. Parabel is an app dedicated to Christian audio dramas and audio docu-series. So if you're looking for some screen-free entertainment where you can enjoy the medium of story, along with exercising your faith, you can sign up to be part of the beta group for Parabel at parabelmedia.com. That's Parabel media.com. Entrepreneurship and ministry have more in common than you'd think. It's all about finding a need and serving people who have that felt need, either with paid or free resources. So, what are the benefits of having a ministry that is a business rather than a nonprofit? The answer might surprise you. Andrew and I have worked on several projects together, one of them a docu-series called Church 2, which is now available on the End It Now Facebook page. So, naturally, we started off our chat with some casual behind-the-scenes conversation that I actually decided to keep in and share with you. You'll get a bit of the behind-the-scenes look into me and my process with Advent Next, as well as the beginning journey of Andrew with his new app, Parabel. We want to thank the Adventist Learning Community for making this program possible. If you're not already following us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, be sure to find us at the handle @Advent Next. You can follow our guest today, Andrew Ashley, on Instagram at Andrew E. Ashley, and me at Kendra R. Snow with an X. But right now, this is Advent Next.
what type of projects you've been into? Like, has it mainly just been a focus on Advent Next and growing that, or has there been other film projects you've been doing?
Honestly, my project lately has been my mental health. That's been the biggest project. I have just, it's been almost a year now, right? It's been almost a year, and that we've been in quarantine, and so it's like limited contact with your friends, limited contact with coworkers. I think I've seen like maybe Steve or James in here like once or twice, in the last year. And it's just kind of like, I think at first it's like, I think I was doing really good and staying motivated because you're like, oh, like we're right over the hump. Oh, things are going to be back to normal very soon. And then when you get to the end of the marathon, you're just tired. And I find myself like falling off. I've fallen off with Advent Next as far as like not doing my weekly podcast. I try so hard and
it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And then like I'm trying to keep up with school, and I'm trying to keep up with my own funks that I have. Like Thursday, I spent all day trying to get work done and I didn't. Like just tired. But I find myself taking more and more of those days, or at least trying to schedule one in every week to say, you're not going to do anything today. So just prepare. There will be one day a week where you will be trapped in your bed, and that's okay. Just create a life that's going to allow for that type of ebb and flow. So that's been that little self-care. I've been getting back more into writing. Like my big goal, I'm turning 34. And so I'm like, I want to have a book deal. Like I have a concept for a book that I want to write and see if anybody bites, basically. So that's kind of been where I'm at lately.
Man, it's weird because I feel, I really feel you on kind of never or not quite feeling like you are where you need to be or where you want to be, whether it's your mental health or even career goals. But I think, you're very age conscious. That's what I learned about you. A lot of things are qualified with, most times when you're talking about your goals, it's like, I'm this age and this is why I feel that way. And once again, I don't want to get preached or anything like that, but I just want to affirm you that, like, dude, you're doing incredible things you're 34 is very young. And I hope so. Please tell me 34 is very young, because I don't want to be turned 34 and feel like, but I'm similar to you that like, I'm always like, yeah, the grass is always greener. I want to reach that. So I resonate with that, but I also want to encourage you and say like, dude, you're killing it. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think, it's one of those, and I appreciate that, and like you said, we have worked really closely together. So, my habits and my tendencies. But I also, I think there's a part of me that, um, that fuels me, right? To be like, you could be doing better, or like there's more aspirational, like you need to be more aspirational in your goals. And that part is motivating, but there's also a part that can turn almost into ingratitude, right?
Mm,
Or almost into like in some ways sinful, because it's like it's not recognizing where God is taking you from and to, and honoring that part of the journey, and like, not comparing yourself with one another. But what about you? Like, it's been a while. You have
yeah, it
some
has.
pretty big things going on, and I'm excited to hear about it. You have a really cool venture happening right now. It's an app called Parabel that's going to be launching soon. Tell us a little bit about this and tell us how you got started on this journey.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Obviously, I just want to say this, like, it's been such an inspiring, so inspiring just seeing your journey. Like,
Mm.
I knew you before, pre-Advent Next, and I remember when you first started talking about the concept, and, like so many times when you're a brilliant creative and you have a vision, a lot of people around you don't get it. I didn't completely see it. I was like, oh, okay, podcasting, Adventist theology. I'm not really into that stuff as much. But then I saw you do it, prove the concept and grow it. And I'm just so impressed, inspired by all the great work you've done. And I'm just really, really happy to be hanging out with you, and that we can
Thank you.
talk on podcasts. We've talked about doing something like this before, so it's fun. But anyway,
Yeah.
just to start it off, I myself, maybe I was even just inspired by your great work about a year and a half ago, after working as working for the church, doing some great film
Right.
projects. I started to develop a passion for narrative fictional storytelling,
Yeah.
and it kind of the genesis of that passion was working as a youth and young adult pastor and
Mm.
preaching a lot of sermons. I grew up in a context where my dad was the head elder and he would preach quite a bit. And you had these several head elders and a pastor, and all the other head elders and pastors, most times when they would preach, it would be very theological, Bible study type of approach, where they would go through several different texts, and it was very lectury. And some people really enjoyed that, and that was edifying. But as a kid and a lot of the youth, obviously that wasn't as appealing to us. And when my dad would preach, he would make it a point to tell these really grand stories. So he would like just take one Bible story. Like I remember one of the sermons that a lot of us really enjoyed. He would do a sermon on Noah, right?
Mm.
And he would take that story and he would tell it, but he would add all this imagery and all this character to it. So he would do something like, imagine, Noah's building the ark, and let's say CNN comes and interview him and says, like, what are you doing? You're crazy. And they're documenting, and people are reporting, Fox News is saying this crazy man is doing that. Like, just paint the picture of what Noah might have been going through, the pressure and being teased. And he would be really great at painting these pictures. And as a kid, as I grew up to become a pastor myself, I really valued that. I saw, man, when you can use the power of story, Bible stories, or even just your own story, and tell it in a very, very, very dynamic way, and use it to point to a truth of the Bible, or a truth about Jesus, or just any type of commentary about the Christian journey. I think it's great. And so I
Yeah.
started doing that a lot in my career as a pastor, and I always saw how it benefited youth and young adults. So anyway, fast forward to working in film and doing a lot of documentary content, which is storytelling. It's just a different type of storytelling. About a year and a half ago, I started to desire, or develop a passion to do fictional narrative scripted content. One of the challenges
Yeah.
with that is it's hard to get movies and made, right? It costs a lot of money, a lot of resources. And, you know, we're both filmmakers. We know what it's like to like have this really cool script idea and try to see what it's going to take. And you figure out it's going to take $100,000. You're like, okay, I guess I'm never going to make movies, you know? And so it's really tough. And so one of the mediums that I started to enjoy is audio dramas. I obviously have been familiar with audio dramas since I was a kid. You have your Story Hour, Adventures in Odyssey. You know, I grew up on, and if you grew up Adventist or Christian, you're familiar with those properties or those audio production companies. So I was very familiar with that. But one thing that you didn't see too much of is audio dramas and audio stories that cater to youth and young adults and up. Right. Most of the content that's been created attracts kids or for kids. And so I developed a passion to like, hey, what if I took some of the story ideas, the themes, the topics that I really want to cover, and I try to produce content, audio dramas using the medium of audio. And so, so basically it started off with just doing a few projects here and there. And then it grew into starting a company, an LLC, and then grew into raising money, producing more and more, and then it developed into an app. And a year later, Parabel Media is the name of the company. Audio production company are kind of one of our taglines is screen-free entertainment, and also dynamic resources for dynamic Christians. And we've produced over 1,000 hours of content so far. And we have the app that's going to be the beta version is going to be coming out in the next few months. And so we're really excited about it. I
have a question. Yeah. So like, you know, one podcast that we have listened to on one of our long road trips of doing some documentary filmmaking is like Masters of Scale, right? Yeah. Where they're scaling up their companies based on their resources. And so was Parabel kind of like a scale project because, you know, you have done a couple of documentaries, you know, the cost of like getting cameras and getting DPs and getting lighting and having the post-production of the editing and then the sound design. Like, were you basically saying like, look at how much is needed for a visual picture? And then were you kind of like scaling down to say like, well, audio is going to be a lot less costly and maybe that way it'd be more effective and viable to be able to get a project like that off the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a big part of it becoming a for-profit business venture. Because before it was kind of like, oh, this is just a cool, fun thing to do. But once I realized that, like, wait a minute, you know, you can actually produce a lot of great content for very little resources and funding. This is a great opportunity to have a Christian for-profit venture that, you know, the dream we talk about this all the time. The dream is to be able to create awesome stuff and glorify God and minister to other people, but also do it for a living and get paid what you need to get paid for a living. And we've both talked about our struggles with trying to, you know, structure our lives that way. And so that was definitely part of it. Like, this is something that could scale greatly, but as far as the resources and expenses, we could keep that down. That was definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I want you to continue talking about the journey. And one thing I just want to pause on, something that you mentioned, is sometimes we have this idea of ministry as only being kind of the nonprofit sector, right? And I get the idea of what a nonprofit should be. It's to say, we want to have all the resources that we have so that we can just focus on the mission and we don't have to focus on a profit. But I think that the downside of that is that if something is being funded and you don't know if, and it's not a product that's being paid for, you don't know if there's really an audience for it, right? Yeah. And you don't know how much you're just keeping something on life support that's really not effective, that people don't really want. And so sometimes having kind of this business model is actually better in the sense that people feel invested in the product and you know that there's an audience for it. And if it dies and it should die, right? And it should evolve into something that might speak more to the time and the culture and to your audience. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a very unpopular way of thinking. And we've talked about this a lot, and I don't want to get in trouble, but that's definitely something we see in the church quite a bit, where a ministry is started, and since it's just funded by the church or organization, a nonprofit organization, there's no need for supply and demand or market product fit, right? That doesn't apply because it's already funded, and so you can just create all this content or do all these projects, and you don't have to go through that filter of supply and demand. And I think that, like you said, it is, there's some consequences to that, because we end up doing projects or not always being a great steward, I feel like, of what God has given us. And I think part of why I kind of wanted to start venturing out into the for-profit space is because, one, the last 7 years, I've worked in the nonprofit space of creating Christian content, and I've seen how people not being compensated for their work as well, right? We both have overseen projects and have people working for us. And one of the most heartbreaking places I've been is that I have someone who's putting in all of this work, and because of the budget I have, I can't really pay them very much. And you just see that a lot working in the nonprofit space. And so for my vision, I don't have no desire to be rich. Like this, it's not the idea is not being rich, but the idea is like, man, how can we set something up where we can get enough capital to really pay people what they deserve so they can make a living, and they don't have to go to the secular world to be able to take care of the family. They can be in the space, in the faith-based space, create, produce, work really hard, and be paid what they deserve to be paid, and in the marketplace. So that's definitely been one of the motivations to making, because when we started off, we weren't even sure if we're going to do it a for-profit organization, for-profit company, or a nonprofit organization. But for-profit just made most sense as far as building something that can last and can really be edifying to both the people who work for the company and those who are receiving the content and the resources.
Yeah. So I want to continue a little bit on the journey. So you have 1,000 hours, which, congratulations, that's amazing, of original content on this platform. So when is it launching, and like what still has to be done before you get to that place?
Our first show, I should say this, our first show that we're launching is a show called A Quarter Life Faith. And it's a podcast. It's a docu-series podcast. It's actually launching this weekend, March 5th. And it's where we interview and document the lives and the journeys of some of the bigger Christian personalities. So whether it's Pentatonics superstar Kevin Alushla, who's the beatboxer and the cello boxer of the group for Pentatonics, and he's also happens to be Christian and also Adventist, and he grew up in a very conservative Adventist context, and documenting his journey from just going to Stanford and then leaving to pursue a life in music, and his parents and how they felt and how he made it to where he is. And basically, as he was going through his 20s, how did he find his purpose with what God wants him to do, and how he escaped the quarter life crisis that many of us go into. And so other people like Justin Koo, the YouTuber, and there's several other people that we're interviewing. And the whole idea with that project is to address kind of what a lot of us go through. I mean, and we can both relate to this, where we're in our 20s, we graduate, we get a degree, and we're working in this sector or that sector, and but we don't really feel fulfillment or feel a complete purpose for what we're doing. And so the whole idea is, if we can look at the stories and the journeys of other people who've actually made it through, that can be edifying for us, and help us kind of take those lessons and apply them to our own life. So that's the first show we're launching, and we actually have a second show that I'm actually partnering. I have the privilege to partner with Justin Koo. He's going to be hosting a Parabel original show called I'm Listening, which is basically it's going to be he's done a YouTube show called I'm Listening, and basically what we will be doing is taking repurposing a lot of that content and telling a lot of the behind the scenes stories from those interviews and those individuals. And so we're really excited about that. And so in late July we're planning on launching a beta, and you'll be able to download it on iTunes, Apple, Android, and it's going to start off for a while, it's going to be free. So it's not going to cost you anything, because a lot of these other audio production companies, they're nonprofit. And so unfortunately, what that means a lot of times is that obviously their cash flow and their resources can be a lot more limited. And so we're in a position where we can not only produce a lot of great content and resources for youth, young adults, and families, but also promote and push and market a lot of the content that's been out there for years that a lot of millennial families don't get access to, because millennial families, they don't download MP3 players, buy CDs or tapes. They consume their content through apps. So it being an app is going to be really, really valuable to reach those millennial families, those millennial individuals, et cetera. So that's kind of some information about how we're launching. But I'm curious if I may,
Kendra, please,
ask you a question.
Okay.
Because I don't know how interesting all that background is for me, but I'm curious for you. You also are passionate about storytelling. I mean, we've talked about that. You've written scripts, you've written books, fictional books, and so you interacting, you being in seminary, you interacting with a lot of more traditional strategies of conveying Christianity and Christian resources. What have you received any pushback on kind of your perspective on telling fictional stories and doing projects that are more abstract or more can even be explicit? Because I've read some of your stuff, and sometimes you've dealt with some really explicit themes, and so I'm curious. I know I've had my own journey with that, and we can talk about that, but I'm curious for you being in seminary, because I'm not in seminary. There's a reason why I didn't go to seminary, but you being in seminary, how has that been, being in that more traditional space? How has it been with your expression of your creative expression? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And it's a great question. And I really appreciate you asking that, because I think even more so than just the creative expression, it's like, how do you be a full, complete human being, right? In the sense that, I think that if you go to seminary and if you do something like Advent Next, and in some ways I feel like, I hope I haven't pigeonholed myself into a personality and into an expectation, because I think there is an expectation that I will act a certain way, right? Or that I will continue to be a certain way, and that my creative expression will also reflect those expectations. And it's a kind of a fault of my own making, right? That I have portrayed myself a certain way and portrayed myself in having certain interests. But for example, there's a podcast that I would like to do, even if it's just for me. That's kind of just more of like an audio diary, and just like 10, 15 minutes of me kind of unraveling a lot of my thought processes, and kind of maybe on the flip side of Justin Ku's I'm listening, this would be like I'm struggling, right? Like, and it really talks about a lot of the theological conundrums that I face, some of the things that I'm dealing with in my life, and I'm not sure where God is in the midst of it. And there's a part of the struggle and the thing that's not beautiful, and the thing that is very difficult to deal with, parts of life that are difficult, grief, disappointment, deferred hopes, when your life doesn't match up with your expectations, all these things, dealing with societal expectations of you, church expectations of you as a woman of color, uh, all of these things. And, just to create space for myself to be myself has been, I think, a difficult part of the journey. And maybe it's not anybody's explicit pushback, but it's the sense of like, I feel like there's an audience for that conversation, but I don't know where they are, right?
Mm.
It because like I said, I think when you're looking at quote niche markets, you're often looking at, the biggest niche market out there for Christianity is like this evangelical Christianity of women who submit to their husbands and who, have a very traditional faith practice. Like that's the largest market of Christian evangelicals. Many of them voted for Trump, right? So, uh, not that, well, I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm just saying
I was
that's
about
not
to
my
say,
thing.
whoa, okay. Are we about to get into that?
Sorry, everybody, but like I'm just a different flavor of
Mm.
Christianity. And I think I can represent kind of a more progressive take on it, um, where I represent a God who, I'm on a tangent, but just follow me and I'll get
Oh,
back
I
on the
love it.
road.
Let's do it.
Okay. Like I was reading today something about, oh, you have to, give a warning to the people and this and that and this and that. And I feel like oftentimes in Christianity, when we talk about the gospel and evangelism and warning people, it's often in the context um, that's very personal improvement centric. It is the sense of like tell people that they need to be better human beings in the sense of like you need to eat well and you need to worry about more about how you dress and how other people perceive you and clean up your public perception. But that's not what the Bible is talking about. Like when God is saying, I'm giving a warning to my people in Isaiah, in Ezekiel and Jeremiah, it's my people are oppressing other people. And that's the wickedness that I'm asking you to clean up. That you're not judging rightly, you're taking bribes, you're corrupting what is the right thing to do in these situations. And it has a kind of a more of a societal feel. It's not this individualistic perfectionism that is sometimes stressed in our circles of Christianity. It's more of like a communal sense of justice that you are doing good to the body.
Mm.
And I don't know if and that type of justice, that type of focus upon righteousness within the community is often one that we think is a dilution of the gospel. It's a dilution of what righteous living is. But that's more of the Christianity that I'm on, right? So I'm on a different side of like what maybe most Christians are. I'm a woman. I'm a woman of color. I kind of come with this more of a creative background, and so I often think like I know that I'm not fully secular, but I don't think I fully fit into the Christian niche. And so I'm wondering like, is there a space of creative expression for me to be uniquely me
Yeah.
in exploring more of that space? And I think that's the part of me that whether it's real pushback or it's my own psychological pushback, that I'm trying to find and discover if there's space there for that development of that voice and that part of who I am.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. And it's funny because I was just thinking a few moments ago, I'm like, man, this is the type of stuff I would like to get into on the podcast with you.
Yeah.
Instead of like, I was thinking like, man, the self-promotion about Parabel, I want to talk about that. But, kind of, we've talked a lot about there's not enough space for creative expression and in the Christian, I don't want to say church, but in the community. Um, and one of the reasons why I left pastoring is because I saw very clearly that like, and this was and kind of is my opinion. And if someone's listening and they have a different opinion, that's completely fine. I mean, I can't think that's kind of my point. Like we should all have different opinions and that's completely fine. And we should feel differently. What I felt was that when you go through the system, at least in the Adventist church, of becoming clergy or being a pastor, you get the undergrad in theology, you come to seminary or what have you. I felt like we as an organization, we create these cookie cutter pastors, or this expectation to be this certain type of way. And there are a lot of people who are naturally that way, so it works for them. Many of my friends, they're brilliant theologians, and they get so much fulfillment just being an interpersonal pastor, or standing on the pulpit, or going to church every weekend and leading a flock. They get so much fulfillment from that.
Yeah.
And what I found is that, man, I'm super passionate about ministry. I am super passionate about spreading the gospel and touching other people's lives, allowing God to use me as a vessel to do so. But I'm not super passionate about pastoring. And which was really weird for me. It's just like, I don't feel like I'm passionate about being a minister, but I don't want to be like a pastor of a church. I'm not super passionate about that and I'm not passionate about administrative tasks. Like, I'm not that type of guy. I'm very much a creative. Now, unlike you, I'm also ADD, right? So there's other things with me, but I definitely relate to the idea of being a creative and wanting to, in many ways, wanting to express yourself the way you want to express yourself and be vulnerable in that space, in that sense. And many times the church is not, it doesn't seem to be structured in a way where that's always welcomed.
Thanks so much for taking the time to listen in. Next week, we dive a little deeper into this conversation and hopefully provide some tools and inspiration for your own creative journey. If you'd like to be part of the beta group and be the first to access this premier screen-free entertainment, sign up at parabelmedia.com. That's Parbel media.com. If you're not already following us on Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram, be sure to do so at Advent Next. You can follow our guest today, Andrew Ashley, at Andrew E. Ashley, or you can follow me at Kendra R. Snow with an X. I just want to say a special thanks to those of you who have left reviews on Apple Podcast or engaging in the comments through YouTube. I really love hearing from you, so please keep it up. Leave a review or send in a request for me to cover a topic you'd enjoy. See you next week.